look at the outcomes differently. Not everything is best if it's cheap. There will be some outcomes that will be best because they're efficient. There will be some outcomes that's best because they're effective. There's some outcomes that will be best because they have long-term potential. So, be mindful. Don't always assume that the most efficient cost per whatever is the way you need to go. Bear in mind that, reaching an influencer who's going to reach more influencers is an incredibly worthwhile investment, although it may not be cheap to do on a cost per basis.
Welcome to the Strategic Momentum Podcast, the show where we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders on what it takes to break through that business inertia and propel you and your business forward. I'm your host, Connie Steele. Media strategy, planning, and buying is a science that even the most seasoned marketers struggle with. What's the best way to allocate the budget? What are the most effective channels? To break through takes understanding the balance that's needed to get to the desired outcome. Today's guest, Imani Greene, founder of Greene Consulting Group, has spent years finding and implementing this balance. She's transitioned from high-ranking positions at big agencies in New York and D.C. to operating her own consultancy, where she takes a hands-on approach to managing advertising campaigns. This move has helped her to prioritize what's important in her campaigns, her business, and her life. And her start small, test and learn mentality has helped propel her and our clients' business forward. Let's start with her career journey.
So the short version is that I got my start out in advertising in New York, Madison Avenue style, worked for several agencies. Saatchi & Saatchi was my very first, went over to McCann Erickson. From there, went to a few smaller firms between Manhattan and New Jersey. Had some of the most powerful learning experiences orchestrated by some of the best teachers in the world, and used that as a catalyst to come down to Washington, D.C., where I began working as the Vice President Media Director at Ogilvy, Washington. That entire trajectory from Saatchi to Ogilvy was about 15 or 16 years long. And thereafter went to a social media shop and called New Media Strategies. And then from there went out on my own and founded Greene Consulting Group, and have been doing that for nearly 5 years now.
So what were some interesting milestones that triggered you to start your own business?
I believe that in my experience, like in many other experiences, everything that you do leads you to a path that forms the next things that you're going to do. So I interestingly didn't think of myself as an entrepreneur, and never would have envisioned myself being an entrepreneur. I'm putting air quotes around that word that you can't see. But in fact, the reality is that I've been rather entrepreneurial my whole life. I had a tiny little business when I was a teenager, but never thought of it as being an entrepreneur. I used to do consulting work on the side for clients, friends, or parents who had businesses that they were trying to grow and build. And I would provide consulting services, and that was entrepreneurialism. And I perhaps didn't think about it that way. And within a matter of, again, maybe 15 or so years of being on the agency side, I just kind of thought to myself, maybe I should look into doing what it is I really want to do and do it for myself. What's the worst that could happen? And the other thing, I think that was sort of the catalyst to it was as you grow up, if you will, in any corporation, you get a better title and you have more, functional responsibilities, but oftentimes those responsibilities are more related to growing the business of the business and managing the personnel, and less about doing whatever functional thing is that the business actually does. And as I had grown over the years, I found that I was doing more sort of agency management and personnel growth and development than actual advertising campaign work. And quite frankly, I missed it. the combination of those wants and needs and personal desires really sort of congealed together to incentivize me to start my own business and to sort of try my hand at designing it and growing it and managing it.
Do you feel that, as you had mentioned, as you move up in the role in any sort of corporate job, you talked about, managing people and the business of the business and not getting as close to the work or growing yourself in that expertise of the work. Do you feel like that's a challenge that many people face, that it becomes less about continuing building your expertise around that area and growing that, and more about just sort of the not so fun management functions that you have to do?
I imagine that people sort of struggle with that, although I can appreciate that that may not be the case for everyone. I can imagine that there's a fair amount of fatigue. If you've been doing something for a long time, you may sort of grow bored and look to do different elements of it. And theoretically, management allows you to be able to branch out into different, in order to learn things differently about it, which is positive. And that was positive for me. But there was still something about being on the ground in a campaign that I missed. I wanted to sit and talk with my clients about who their audiences were and create new channels to reach them and new opportunities. And because being in comms and advertising, so much of the work that we do is in digital, there's no lack of ability or lack of need to grow and change and learn every single day, because the world of digital requires that you do so in order to even be able to survive, let alone stay engaged and entertained. So I can see both sides of the coin. I'm grateful for my experience. I'm grateful to have learned how to be a senior vice president and how to help build an organization and manage it and manage finances and manage P&L. It's a pleasure now to do those same kinds of things for my own business. So I would say, agency life is hard life. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of people. An agency doesn't have a product other than its own sort of human capital. And so the ability or the need to functionally manage up, down, and sideways around around the human capital can be tedious over time. And might I reiterate that the hours that you spend doing that can just be killer. I mean, there have been times in my life. I remember a time in particular, kind of following the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the a lot of the financial institutions, that agencies were in a real bind. And the market gets tough when the financial resources get tough for brands. The first place that they generally look to save money is in advertising and marketing and comms. And so that creates a reciprocal effect on the agencies that tends to be pretty painful. And so the result is that they do a lot more work with less people. So an ad agency or a comms agency or a PR shop or whatever it is that you work for, in as much as it's sort of known for always working people really hard and for long hours, will struggle sort of tenfold when the market is a little bit of trouble. So when at its worst, I remember having probably about $10 million worth of business, and I was running it with one other person, who, by the way, is still one of my dearest friends and one of the most amazing women I know. But she and I managed $10 million worth of business, a lot of which was in sort of really small increments, 50,000 here, 100,000 there. And we probably worked about 16, 17-hour days, 6 to 7 days a week for about 6 months. And we were just depleted, just exhausted. And I would say that probably that was the sort of the beginning of the end of me sort of feeling inspired to work in an agency. I needed to go someplace where I could have better control of, my hours and my time. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I would offer, however, that I'm glad that I did that stretch, that 6-month stretch of 16, 17-hour days. It taught me what can be done. It taught me what I could and couldn't sustain. It taught me what kinds of balance was necessary, but it taught me what I was made of. And as it turns out, I'm made up of an awful lot. And there are lots of days now where there are 16, 17 hours that get poured into work, but that's okay. I'm willing to do it. I love what I do. I like to think I'm pretty good at it. My clients seem to think I'm pretty good at it. There's also the ability to say I'm going to put in 16, 17 hours for the next 2 days so that the rest of the week I only have to put in a couple of hours each day because I've already set this campaign live. I've already put in the work that needs to be done in order to move forward. That's something it's a decision that I can make on my own that was more difficult to make when I was employed by an organization. So it's really, really nice. It's a treat to be able to say that I can do that for myself right now.
Imani's shift from big agency to small consultancy has granted her the freedom to take control of her time. While she doesn't regret working 17-hour days because it taught her what she's made of, she's now able to find the balance in her schedule to prevent burnout and produce her best work. With this newfound agility, Imani has also been able to achieve and maintain the intimate and authentic client relationships that she's always valued. But that's not the only advantage she's found working for herself.
Greene Group, technically Greene Consulting Group, but affectionately referred to as Greene Group, is an advertising consultancy, which means that I go into a brand or into an agency and provide strategic counsel and tactical execution if needed for a brand that has a relevant need. Generally speaking, there are 3 categories of the types of business that I service. One is sort of advocacy and public affairs, and that can come through a corporation or a nonprofit or anything. And those are generally intended to influence the administration in the Hill, generally. The second would be business that comes from the federal government. So those tend to be, oftentimes they're sort of health communications, but they may be something different, something that, the government wants people to know. So essentially it's a public awareness campaign. And then the third is anything that is corporate and consumer. That said, the benefit of being able to work for myself in this way is that I do maintain a level of connectivity at the brand level. But quite frankly, I really, really, really enjoy working with the agency as well. The agencies are where I get where you get the benefit of collective group think. It's where you get a lot of sort of inspiration, quite frankly, because there are a lot of folks who are super smart about different things who are all sitting around a table looking to source an answer. So it's great to be able to still align with the agencies. And I would say probably 65% of my business or so is through an agency. But I'm able to still maintain the relationships at the agency level while also maintaining those direct relationships on the client side that allow me to be able to be really smart about a brand. Because to your point, yes, you can get a little bit lost if you're sort of sitting at the top of a glass tower, dishing out recommendations.
Well, and it also has afforded you the ability to have more control and hopefully flexibility over your life as well.
Indeed. My office I have 3 offices. I have a home office that gets a lot of functional use. I have a DC office that gets a little bit of functional use. And I have a laptop that is an extension of my brain. My office can be in a Starbucks. It can be in the front seat of a car on a busy corner. And believe me, it has been many times. It could be on the side of a highway. And believe me, it has been many times. I just need, very, very simple technology in order to be able to power my business forward at most times. As long as I've got a computer and a phone, I can pretty much accomplish most of my basic tasks throughout the day.
Do you feel that in the past that was an ability that you were able to do? So this newfound mobility and agility that you have in your own business, is that something that just wasn't realized, but something that you certainly feel that you're able to do now.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I'm not saying, right, is that sometimes it's on the side of the highway. Sometimes it's on the corner of 19th and L in D.C. Sometimes it's in Mexico. And no, that was not a capability before. And it doesn't prevent me from being productive. I'm just as productive in Mexico, quite frankly. And I've done the homework. I've tested the theory. I can, I have the ability to design my life around my life as compared to designing my life around my work. If I need to pick up my kid from school or attend a play or visit a teacher or go to the grocery store, those are all things that I can do. And this life, this crazy, hectic life that we've all aligned ourselves with requires you to be able to work from home and home from work in order to get it all done. Not to say that it's all done, but to the extent that it's even close, it's because there's enough flexibility in my day and also flexibility in my life to be able to do all the things I need to do, and also to pay myself the kinds of rewards that I would like to pay myself, whether that be a trip to Mexico or a long lunch or God help me, a nap in the middle of the day, if that's what needs to happen. If I wake up at 4:00 in the morning and I've put in 9 hours by 1 p.m., then yeah, I might lay down and take a nap if that's what I need. And it's not, I don't even know if I would call it a reward. It's something that I need to give myself, that myself needs to have. And I'm grateful for the ability to apply that.
And so of those experiences and I'm sure others, how have they shaped the way you approach business and the way you work today?
I have more order in my life now than I've ever had. I don't have a huge infrastructure in my business. I have one full-time employee and one part-time employee. I hope that in 5 years, I will have one full-time employee and one part-time employee. I'm not looking to become an agency. I've been at an agency. I've practically run agencies. That's not what I'm inspired to do. But that said, working as this sort of very lean operation has required me to become more organized. My day is generally as follows. I wake up between 4 and 4:30. I try on a good day, especially in January, in the beginning of a new year, to spend, at least, 15 or 20 minutes sort of being peaceful. I wouldn't call it being meditative, but being peaceful, maybe doing some light stretching, kind of getting organized for my day. And then I will work starting at about 4:30. I work from 4:30 to 6:30 or so. I get up, I take my kid to school and do his whatever he needs to do before school. I go to the gym for about 2 hours. And then I come back and work. Half of the week I go into DC, half of the week I stay in my home office. There's more structure and order than it used to be. Before, I was just kind of, okay, this is where I need to be now, and I'm going to go here and do there. I'm going to work on this. I'm going to work on that. I have a lot of sort of weekly tasks. I have a lot of monthly tasks deliverable on certain days to myself, and I'm more responsible to those tasks than I ever have been. I did learn the hard way that all was required, but I did learn it. It took me probably, a year or two to figure out what the appropriate sort of, mix of things and schedule was for myself. But once I did it and acquiesced to it, it became a much, much simpler sort of process.
Working lean and agile has taught Imani to be more organized and structured than ever before. It's about finding the right mix to optimize her schedule and her output. This approach is mirrored in how she handles her clients' challenges. Whether it's creating brand awareness or inspiring a vote, the key is prioritizing the right messages and finding the right mix of channels to cut through the noise and reach different segments.
Given the proliferation of, all these different outlets to reach and promote to consumers, what challenges do you really see with respect to tapping into them and getting your message heard?
I think the overall challenge is the volume of messages that are coming into any group of people at any time. and the challenge that any brand will have to make its way into that sphere of messaging and create a meaningful connection. We are just these, sort of microwave generation people. And that tends to be the case no matter which demographic group you belong to. I mean, even senior citizens are now sort of, they're looking for information. They're looking for it quickly. They're looking for it on multiple devices. So in as much as there are specific challenges for each specific vertical and for specific audiences, the larger challenge sort of in mass is that there is just a whirlwind of information at any given point, and consumers have very little appetite to spend time digesting and extracting insights. They want their information. They want it customized just for them. They want it quick, and they want it exactly when they want it. And so a brand challenge is to figure out how to make their way through that whirlwind, create that meaningful connection, and then move a current or potential customer or supporter or advocate or what have you down the continuum of engagement, essentially.
And what do you think they're doing wrong today with respect to trying to connect with them, as you said, and then subsequently move them down, the buyer's journey?
Well, there are lots of things. I think every brand has things that it could be doing better. And I think they tend to fall in a few buckets. One bucket that I find very frequently is, oftentimes bigger brands are looking to kind of disseminate a bigger message in one big wave. And audiences are decreasingly open to getting these sort of big messages in a wave. People are looking for small, customized nuggets that feel right to them, or else it just becomes something that they overlook really quickly. So you can spend a lot of money creating a lot of messages and pushing them out. If there's no nuance to them, if they're not specific, if they're not addressing the human being's individual need, you could find a tremendous amount of waste. That's one thing. Another thing is, I think some, there's probably a million buckets, quite frankly, but some brands are, they fall on either the far end or the near end of the scale in terms of being nervous about digital. Some are, or social or what have you, right? Some are scared to try messaging, scared to fail, scared to show their board or their stakeholders or whomever that they've made an investment that didn't pan out. Others are, we call it spray and pray, right? They're just throwing money out there and hoping to God that something is going to land. I think there is a bit of a happy medium, and the happy medium is different for every single brand, but there does need to be a continuous commitment to sort of modest trial and error and spending the most money where you're getting the best outcomes while still utilizing a separate sort of nugget of money to explore new opportunities, reach new audiences, and don't be afraid to measure the outcomes from that audience differently. Everything is not going to be measured on a cost per click basis or something like that. Some things are just going to be, maybe it's less efficient, but maybe you're reaching fewer people who have more powerful influence or who might be a better customer. And it's worth spending a little bit more for those people. So keeping people off of the same yardstick for measurement is generally a good idea as well.
Do you also feel that, there's that camp of people where they're over-indexing on the analytics of measuring everything? Because media planning, to me, while there's certainly a science, there's also an art to it. There's an intuitiveness to it because you're dealing with people and tying together, the insights that you find about your target audience and coupling that with, also where it could be relevant, but maybe there's other places that you could tap into to target to them. May not always be so obvious in the numbers.
Yeah, I think so I've had the benefit of a pretty atypical trajectory from a media planner's perspective. There are not a lot of media planners in Washington, D.C., and not a lot of them are are lucky enough as I am to say that they were trained in, big New York shops. But, to some degree, there's a reason for that. When things are sort of purchased differently in DC, which I learned the hard way again. In DC, there are not a lot of huge campaigns that are done for advertising's sake. When you're in New York, you've got, $40-50 million budgets. Everything is done for the ad campaign's sake. All the messages are created for it. All the reporting is done for it. All of the research and evaluation and everything is done for the ad campaign. In DC, that's actually not the case at all. And I'm so fortunate to have learned how to think about an advertising campaign that's actually not done for the advertising campaign's sake. It's done for the communication plan's sake. It's done for the brand's sake. So it could be, for example, that you have a micro campaign that spends $10,000 just to amplify something that is being done on the PR side. Maybe there's a tremendous wave of PR support that's been sort of bubbling and looking to rise to the surface. But because no one is seeing it, it's not going far enough. Well, advertising can be used as an isolated expense just to create visibility for those PR hits. And the measurement for that ends up being very different. It maybe here again, it's not measured on a click. Maybe it's measured by how many people read the article, how many people scrolled through all the way to the bottom, how many times the video was revealed, how many times people shared it. You have to start to look at advertising in a different way and recognize that if just because a product isn't running off the shelf or someone is not clicking on a banner, that doesn't necessarily have to be the end of the story for the ad campaign. The ad campaign can also perhaps be it could be a small investment on Google search just to test messaging to see if people like, different wording, or if they like, maybe it's on social and they're looking to align images with different words to see how it's causing people to react. So to the extent that you can stop and think about what other business goals the brand has that the advertising campaign can fulfill on, it allows you to be a little bit smarter and, quite frankly, a little less conceited about the advertising and just sort of seed that money to the benefit of the good and create the appropriate measurements for that and appropriate, management of outcomes and ROI for that as compared to how well your ad buy is doing.
Getting your message heard is even more challenging today than ever before. And there are some that spray and pray and hope that something just sticks. That's obviously not an efficient approach. So it's important that you measure the performance of your campaign. Yet clicks and click-through rates alone may not be the ideal metrics to assess whether or not your advertising or communications goal is achieved. In fact, the measurement may be very different. And as Imani will tell us, there are some other common misconceptions that even big brands get wrong.
Do you feel like many people have this misconception that when they're ready to do advertising and communications, that it always has to be a big bang? So when they're ready to do something, that they need to tell the whole world that they can do it, or tell the whole world that they're here, that look at me, I'm so great. And correspondingly, expect the strategists like you to deliver on sort of this mass communication that could target everyone and anybody that they want to.
I think, to the earlier point that I was making, that if people brands sit on either end of that scale. Some feel like they shouldn't do anything until everything is perfect. And we all know that the perfect is the enemy of the good. And they'll wait and wait and wait. And I've seen this with my very own eyes. I've seen brands miss out, big brands, massive brands, miss out on the opportunity to claim a point of view because they waited too long for it to be, air quotes, ready, rather than starting off small and creating an ownership that can grow. On the other hand, I also believe firmly that you do need to make sure that you have certain basic audience engagement, capture opportunities in place before you're willing or ready to go out with anything. For example, you want to make sure you've got a good tested website that is not just communicating what you think you want to communicate, but that's also driving people to an outcome. For example, if you've got a website that you've sort of just, created, but you don't know whether you're testing the right language or anything like that, you can find that you either offend people or you ostracize them or that you just don't engage them. And when you, if they come to your website and don't take action or aren't inspired, they're not going to come back. They're not going to come back. And that's worse than wasting money. That's wasting, kind of a connection opportunity. So again, finding what that happy medium is different for each brand, but making sure that you're, having enough infrastructure to capture the people that you want and to never let them get away is the bare minimum expectation. But you also don't need to wait until you're so far down the path that you've sort of missed the chance, because again, the perfect can be the enemy of the good in some instances.
Do you believe that really to truly connect with the audience and engage with them these days, it really starts with testing small and iterating and ultimately ensuring that you're aligning it to various outcomes? It may not just be one, but defining all those different, as you said, business goals in which you could leverage, these small testable situations in advertising.
The way I would phrase it, and testing small is absolutely an appropriate start. But the reality is, you need to make sure that you have an honest, sincere dialogue with your audience. There is no such thing as a woman 25 to 54. There's no such thing. There's a woman 25 and there's a woman 54. And they think about very different things and they care about very different things. Now, you might find that they have some things in common. And engaging that woman 25 or 54 based on the things that she cares about or fears or is inspired by or craves, those are the ways to actually create meaningful connections with your audience. Once you can break those audiences down into sort of meaningful emotions and then create dialogue along those continuums, maybe it's a focus group, maybe it's one-on-one personal interviews, maybe it's Google searches, whatever it is. But I think that in order for a brand to really create a product that its audience is compelled by, it needs to understand its audience on some deeper and more personal levels than demographics. And then it can start to, justify those decisions that it's making for that target audience, regardless of how they try to do so. And then, to your point, establishing smart, appropriate milestones, figuring out how to optimize your efforts, those things all sort of work in a linear path. But understanding your audience and keeping the dialogue absolutely open, having the infrastructure within your organization to constantly make sure that you're hearing what people are saying, that you're either deciding to apply those insights or those learnings, or that you don't have to, but it's a conscious decision not to, is absolutely critical to doing business in our day and age. My job is to figure out how to identify with some specificity the narrow audiences that are consuming each platform, each and every channel, and the best way to go about directing your message to that audience on those channels. All of those channels may not make sense, right? All of those channels may not be targetable. All of those channels may not be efficient. And that's okay, because, our goal is to try to be smart about the tools that our audience is using and might use. So we start small with the things that we're sort of exploring. We try to figure out how best to target it within the context of the capability or the technology that exists on that platform, identify milestones, how much money makes sense for us to invest before we can extract an insight, or we can either divest or increase spending. How do we make sure that we're utilizing the technology best so that it engages this narrow sliver of our audience, but maybe a whole bunch of narrow slivers? how do we determine ROI at the end of the day? So that's my job. My job is to be as smart about it as I possibly can and to apply any learnings that I have with one client to the grander landscape of the larger client base that I have.
Starting small and iterating works for nearly any marketing initiative. A big bang ad campaign isn't the approach if you want to connect with your different segments in a meaningful way. You have to know your audience at a much deeper level than demographics alone. It's important to have that ongoing dialogue to hear what they're saying. And once you do, you need to know when to apply those insights while also analyzing the data to see where you're achieving the greatest return on investment. The reality is the path isn't linear, and you can shape campaigns to find lots of testable outcomes. Again, it's about finding the balance.
My rule is if you don't know how much you should spend and you don't know how much you should invest either on a platform or for your whole campaign, I can tell you anything, but at the end of the day, it's really a function of what your overall parameters are. More importantly, the real goal is to figure out not so much how much you're putting into it, but how much you need to get out of it. Every test, every buy, every placement is so different. Every audience is so different. If you've got, you could have $100,000 to spend, but you could have 100,000, people to reach or 1 million people to reach. It doesn't matter, but you've got to figure out, what you need to get out of it. And only then can I really help guide you on how much you should spend to test this product. If you've got $100,000 and you need to deliver $1 million worth of product, we're going to back into your strategy from that. If you've got $100,000, but you need to drive 10,000 signatures on a petition, we need to back into it from that. If you need to sell 100,000 pieces of product, we need to back into it from that. And once we have, the world of digital allows you to be able to make pretty solid projected outcomes because stuff is replicable, right? So if we know how much we think we need in order to deliver your outcome, we then know how much we have to explore some different scenarios. And so that's what I would say is, know your audience, know your intended outcomes. And from there, let's not be afraid to have a little fun. Let's try some different things. Let's reach some different people. Let's say some unusual, let's be provocative, if the brand will allow for it. Let's have some fun with it. But let's just be smart and thoughtful about our priorities so that we can do so with some confidence.
What I take away is this whole notion of really prioritize your parameters and have fun while you're at it to test potential outcomes that you might not have even known that could benefit you.
Look at the outcomes differently. Not everything is best if it's cheap. There will be some outcomes that will be best because they're efficient. There will be some outcomes that's best because they're effective. There's some outcomes that will be best because they have long-term potential. So, be mindful. Don't always assume that the most efficient cost per whatever is the way you need to go. Bear in mind that reaching an influencer who's going to reach more influencers is an incredibly worthwhile investment, although it may not be cheap to do on a cost per basis.
So a lot of it is learning how to find the right balance between all these different factors that ultimately do have that impact on the outcome.
I would say so.
Knowing where to invest your time and money comes down to having a deep understanding of your audience, your intended outcomes, and ultimately the trade-offs in determining which media plan would be best. But for Imani, it's always been about creating connections to the people that matter most. Her ability to prioritize those factors that deliver the most beneficial outcomes has carried her forward in how she balances what she does for her clients and in her own life.
And I think that's what has allowed me to be able to spend more quality time doing quality things. I'm wiser about the things that I'm not good at now, and I have very little need or reason to do so. I can bring people on into my life to create a beautiful PowerPoint report or do a manicure. It's all, there are lots of things that I'm not great at, but I'm happiest when I'm doing the things that I am good at, and I'm doing those with the potential outcome or the hopeful outcome or the desired outcome, at least, of being proud of what I've put into it. And that goes across the board. That's applicable professionally, for my clients, for my colleagues. It's applicable to my family. It's applicable to my friends. I just try to do a job that I can be proud of. And I get better at that as I grow up.
Absolutely. And I can completely relate to that. It's knowing where your strengths are and capitalizing on that, but also being honest with yourself and with your clients, knowing that here's where I can deliver the most value and where I know that I can support you in finding others that could be maybe better suited to address you in all these, versus forward telling and saying that I can do everything.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's just going to be better for them, because you're really thinking about the mutual benefit versus the transactional nature of, getting more money for the business.
Right. And that's not to say that you're not always trying new things, because I am. And I'm always adding new things to the list of things I'm doing well. And sometimes the things that I used to be doing well, I find that as I add to the list of things I do well, maybe other things are falling off the list. So there's always growth and evolution, but, just sort of concentrating on the spaces where you can really, to use your words, add value is generally good counsel.
And to close, knowing what you know now, what advice would you tell your younger self?
Save more money and stop procrastinating. You want honesty on your podcast?
Absolutely.
Done and done.
And what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
You can go to my website, which is greeneconsultinggroup.com. And you can check me out on social media. I am almost always Imani Greene. Green like the color with an E at the end.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing your story, your insightful perspective on advertising in today's, kind of challenging digital environment. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me, Connie.
While you can never predict the outcome of an advertising campaign with 100% accuracy, you can take the necessary steps to get as close to your desired results as possible. That means spending wisely, working backwards from your goals, and not relying on the spray and pray approach. For effective media planning and advertising, you have to understand your audience at a deep level in order to prioritize your messaging and create the right balance in your mix. A big bang just doesn't work, but starting small and testing and learning does. As Imani revealed, being a small, agile firm helps, but regardless of the size of your organization, it's critical that your input reflects your output and that you offer real value to the people that matter most. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Imani through her website, greeneconsultinggroup.com. That's GREENE consultinggroup.com, or by searching Imani Greene on social media. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a review. This is what helps others find the podcast. To hear previous episodes or get show notes from this episode, you can visit us at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. And don't forget to follow Strategic Momentum on Facebook and Instagram. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.